Have you ever suffered a reaction to something you've eaten? If you have, you probably have a condition called food hypersensitivity. Let's look into why this happens. There are different types of food hypersensitivity. Food allergy, celiac disease, and food intolerance are 3 examples. Food allergy is when your immune system, which helps your body fight infections, mistakes the proteins in food as a threat. Allergic reactions can range from mild to very serious, such as itchiness, hives, vomiting, swelling of the eyes, lips and airways, which makes it difficult to breathe. The most severe allergic reaction is called anaphylaxis, which can even lead to death. You can be allergic to any food, but certain foods are responsible for most food allergies. In the UK, food businesses must tell you if they use any of the 14 key allergens in the food and drink they produce. The 14 include common allergens like nuts, peanuts, eggs and milk, as well as unusual ones such as lupin, celery, mustard and sulfites. Celiac disease is an autoimmune condition caused by a reaction to gluten found in grains such as wheat. The immune system attacks the small intestines and reduces its ability to absorb nutrients from food. Following a gluten-free diet can prevent long-term health problems. Food intolerance doesn't involve your immune system and is never life-threatening. The symptoms of a food intolerance can occur hours after eating the offending food. People with food intolerance tend to experience symptoms like diarrhea, skin rashes or itching. So there you have it. The FSA explains food hypersensitivity. You can find out more information at food.gov.uk.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Food Standards Agency webinar on the forthcoming allergen information changes for pre-packed for direct sale food, particularly for local authorities. Next slide, please. I'm Sushma Acharya. I'm the head of the Policy and Strategy for Food Hypersensitivity. I lead on the General Food Information team, and I'm also working as a lead for the FSA's Food Hypersensitivity Programme, which was established last year. Our work covers food allergies, from allergies, intolerances and celiac disease. It's one of the key priorities for the Food Standards Agency, and our aim is to make UK one of the best places in the world to be a food hypersensitivity consumer, so that they actually have the ability to make safe and informed food choices. One of the key areas of the work that we've been undertaking is the implementation of the allergen information changes for pre-packed direct sales food, which is coming into force on the 1st of October. And that's one of the reasons why we have held this webinar. We recognise that there are challenges for local authorities. There have been challenges for food businesses on the backdrop of COVID and the pandemic, which was really, really unexpected. And we recognise that the implementation of the regulations is happening in a very, very unexpected context. We at the Food Standards Agency, mindful of the implementation, have a range of resources which include a new revised information technical guidance. We've got online training, which includes pre-packed direct sale training. And also we began our 1 year to go campaign last year with a countdown. In terms of local authorities, we've got smarter communications platform where we've now got some dedicated pages for pre-packed direct sale and content that is relevant for pre-packed direct sales to help local authority colleagues. With a few months to go with implementation, we want to give you an overview of what these changes are and what your role will be in the implementation of these changes. There's going to be plenty of opportunity during this afternoon session to ask questions, and I'll go through a little bit more about how you ask questions shortly. We're going to be recording the session, so for those colleagues who weren't able to join us, we will be putting this out a week commencing of the 9th of August on Smarter Comms, so please push this out to your colleagues who weren't able to come along today. And in terms of the Q&A resource that we've got on Smarter Communications, we will be updating those, and we will be ensuring that we answer as many questions as possible that you have. No doubt you've got quite a lot of questions. So moving on, next slide, please. So let's start off with something a little bit lighter. During the course of this afternoon, we will be asking some polling questions. Please, could you participate throughout the webinar? These are going to be posted on the right-hand side. It could be multiple choice. It could be a simple yes or no answer, or a little bit more detail. So I'm going to kick off by just testing this out a little bit and asking you, where are you joining us from today? So put some answers in, and let's see whether the polling system is working. I'm hoping that the system is operating. We can pick that up in a short while. So let's just continue with the next slide, please, whilst we're waiting to see what the poll is doing for us, and it's operating. So let's run through the through the agenda. So what have we got in store for you today? So we've got some fantastic speakers. So we're going to start off by listening to Tim McLachlan, the Chief Executive of the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation. Tim's going to talk to us about the background of the campaign that led to the legislative change for pre-packed direct sales, also known as Natasha's Law, and the foundation, which was established by Natasha's parents. We're going to follow that up by an overview of the new PPDS requirements, pre-packed direct sales requirements, followed by an overview of the enforcement responsibilities for local authorities and colleagues involved in this area, as well as considering the comments of the overall approach to enforcement. The last two aspects are a short run through the sort of key questions we're asked regularly and the common questions. So I thought it would be useful and beneficial to run through some of those key areas because there's a commonality that comes through from there. Followed by a Q&A live session. We will be joined by Callum Ewell from Food Standards Scotland for our Q&A open session. So coming to the questions, and how do you raise the questions? You can do that throughout the whole session this afternoon by typing in the question in the question tab, which appears on the left-hand side. You can also give it the thumbs up if you like a question that's been raised by your fellow colleagues. And also you can actually see what questions are being asked. You can view these on the left-hand side of your screen, but we'll try and cover as many as we can. And you know that we've got quite a large participant numbers, so we'll try and see whether we can bulldoze through as many questions as possible. And lastly, I'm going to go through the resourcing and the information that's available to you to assist you as we lead through the implementation towards the end. The evaluation will also be issued to participants tomorrow, and I would please encourage everyone to respond to the evaluation form when it is circulated, to return it to us. It will help us, and it's incredible that you will have your input into it. So let's go on. Let me start by introducing Tim from the Natasha Allergy Foundation, Research Foundation. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Sushma, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to be joining you this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about the why of Natasha's Foundation and the why of Natasha's Law. And the one takeaway I'm going to be giving you at the end of this is just a one-liner, and that is Natasha's law is not about labelling, it's about life and death. So if there's one thing to take away from my short presentation to you, it's that. So Natasha's foundation was created by Nadim and Tanya Ednan Laperouse, whose daughter Natasha tragically died in 2016. Many of you will know the story from the news and the media coverage. And Nadim says, we could choose to do something as a family, or we could choose to do nothing. And they chose to do something following Natasha's death. They wanted to create a world without allergy, and so establish the foundation in Natasha's memory to fund allergy research. And that's what is our main goal. We also campaign for change, and we raise awareness of the dangers of food allergy as well. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the scale of food allergy, and there's some facts on the screen there. Think of it like this. The numbers are equivalent to one child in every class in every school in the UK has a food allergy. In terms of adult population, it's up to 2%, up to 3 million people from latest numbers. And when you see terms like may contain on products, for a person with a food allergy, read that as may contain a deadly poison. A food allergen can act like a deadly poison in how your body responds to it. So it's not the dosage, it's not the amount that matters, it's any dose. Allergies can develop at any age. Food allergies impact a whole family's food choices, and it's not a lifestyle choice, and it's not the same as food intolerance. The general difference is immune response is a food allergy. That's what can actually cause a fatal reaction. A digestive response is often a food intolerance. Now that's not exclusive, but just as a rule of thumb. And intolerances can still make you feel very unwell. And if we could put the poll up, please. I've got a quick number of questions for you about, have you been affected by allergy, or do you have allergy yourself? So if you could participate in the poll just while I'm talking, that would be great to see, because we all know, love, or are somebody affected by food allergy. The numbers are going up of people with food allergy, or at least the numbers of people being admitted to hospital, and they've gone up 615% in that 20-year period, and will have gone up since, and we don't know why. There are lots of hypotheses, and I'm not going to go into that, but the bottom line is we need more research to understand why. Until we find a way that we can prevent and eradicate allergies, they are here to stay. And food allergies, for the number of people affected, are a major health concern. Next slide, please. So why? Why is this important? Well, a severely allergic reaction to a food allergen can be called anaphylaxis. You will have heard of anaphylactic shock and terms like that. And it's a terrifying situation that requires immediate medical treatment. Some of the symptoms are shown on the slide there. And what it can lead to is feeling lightheaded, faint, difficulty breathing, a fast heartbeat, clammy skin, confusion, anxiety, and collapsing and losing consciousness, often when the tissues swell up and an individual is unable to breathe. It can kill in minutes. This isn't something that can creep up on you. Allergic reactions can happen very suddenly. The treatment, the only way that we can actually lessen the symptoms, is with an injection of adrenaline. And many of you will know of AAIs, autoadrenaline injectors. And I'd just like to say to you, firstly, make sure that you get that and administer it according to the instructions. Call an ambulance immediately and lie the person down flat. And if they need another injection later on, then give them that. The pens are easy to use, and they can be used through clothing. So if there's another takeaway from this, please look up using an AAI, because you never know when you might be in that first aid situation. Thank you. Next slide, please. So food allergy can start in anyone at any age. It's true that the incidence in childhood is higher, and many children grow out of it. Often, if they haven't grown out by the age of 10, then it's a lifelong enduring food allergy. And often people have got more than one food allergy. Most importantly though, it can start in anyone at any age. And I'd like to tell you a quick story, and that is, when it comes to a person who's eaten something all their life, they can still develop a food allergy later on. So I just like to tell you a quick story, and apologies if that noise is in the background behind me. I do apologize. A young man was over in Mexico. He lived in Mexico in his 20s, and now he's come back to the UK, working here in his 40s. And he has developed a corn allergy. That's despite having had corn products almost all his life, and especially when he was living in Mexico. So anybody can develop an allergy at any age. Thank you. Next slide, please. So why do we get food allergy? Next slide, please. That's the big question. So I've got one slide to help answer that. Well, it's the body's reaction to a normal protein, a common protein. Immunoglobulin E is one of our antibodies, and it's known as the allergy antibody, and it's been subverted to attack proteins. We don't know why. And this change to our immune system has happened, and it means it's going to increase. So it was developed, our immune system, to do just this, attack common proteins, or rather parasite proteins that were unexpected, worms and things like that, which we used to be exposed to an awful lot more. When it comes to common proteins today, like egg, milk, the dairy protein, peanuts and things like that, nuts, all the 14 allergens that we know, in fact, there are 170 known food allergens that the immune system has started to attack. So we don't know why, but we know that it's happening. I said that a severe allergic reaction can kill in minutes. And crucially, another point for you, one allergic reaction doesn't predict the severity of the next, which is why individuals with a food allergy needs to carry an EpiPen, Jext, Emerade, one of the AAIs. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to play a short video for you. This is from Nadim and Tanya, who were very sorry to not be able to join us this afternoon. If you could play the video, that would be great. Thank you. They're going to explain about Natasha's law and how it came about and what it covers.
Natasha's law is really important for British society, and what it's about is about food labelling on pre-packaged for direct sale food. Sounds a bit complicated, but it's not at all. This is all relevant to food that is actually made on the premises of a particular sandwich shop, for example, and then pre-packaged before it's sold to the public. So it's a pre-packaged food for direct sale. And Natasha's law is all about covering the labelling. It relates to the ingredients of that food and also highlighting the 14 allergens on that food as well.
Natasha's law means that all prepackaged food, whether it's made in a factory or if it's made on site, will have to include all the ingredients so that anybody looking at the label on the packaging will know exactly what they're buying, and therefore they can make a good decision as to whether or not that's safe for them.
So currently food producers who make food that are pre-packaged for direct sale on the premises don't actually have to adhere to any laws or regulations that mean they have to put any ingredients on. And that, I think, to a lot of people would be quite a shock, as it really was to us. I think it was unbelievable when we found that out. I think all our lives we've believed that whatever there needed to be said would be put on the packaging, as we see it when we buy food in a supermarket that is packaged. But it's not at all the case in sandwich shops around the country. In our family's case, Natasha bought a sandwich, or we bought a sandwich together actually at the airport, and it was pre-packaged, so it looked rather like a supermarket sandwich. And there was what I'd call partial information on it, so it gave some of the ingredients on the sandwich, but not all of it. So in many ways, we were kind of lulled into a sense of false security. And this is the big problem. When you're buying and you're moving on the go and you're buying food, you make decisions quickly. Basically, you don't lull on it and just think for hours on end about it. It's fast. And if there's information there, you read it and you take it at face value. And there's a trust element there. And in this case, that trust cost us our daughter's life. It's really important Natasha's law comes into force and those things do change so that people with allergies are properly protected, like they should be, and not second-class citizens. It's outrageous.
This is covering a law that existed that was never really meant for large chains that prepackage food, and it's really tightening it and making it safe so that ultimately it can save people's lives.
So I hope that was helpful to hear from Nadim and Tanya and to see why Natasha's law came about. The tragic loss of their daughter, of any of the young people or anyone who tragically dies from food anaphylaxis every year, is one too many. So Natasha's law is about keeping people safe and increasing the number of safe food choices for someone with a food allergy. So Natasha died in 2016. The charity was founded in 2018, and Natasha's law was approved and now will be implemented from the 1st of October this year. And I'd just like to say again, thank you to the FSA and all the members of the various teams that have worked so hard to introduce this amendment to the legislation and close this loophole, as it could be referred to help keep people with food allergy safe. Next slide, please. So Natasha's Foundation, what do? We're the only charity funding allergy use research in the UK. We're looking to prevent allergies, looking to their cause and treatments to eradicate it. We campaign for policy change. Natasha's law is the start, and there's so much more to do. And we want to make sure that allergy and food allergy is a particular priority for the government. We've just launched our campaign for an allergy czar that you may have seen. We want to call for full ingredient labelling wherever possible, because it's more than the 14 food allergens prescribed in law. That, as I said earlier, there are over 170 known food allergens. So full ingredient labelling was the outcome of the public consultation on Natasha's law, and that's what enables people to make safe food choices, especially if they're allergic to something outside of the 14. We want to see unnecessary food allergens eliminated wherever possible. We want to raise awareness of the life-threatening danger of food allergies across all sectors and all ages. Next slide, please. So I hope that some of the things I've said to you this afternoon have helped raise that awareness. So food allergy, the prevalence, I've mentioned one child in every class in every school. And if we could possibly just have the poll results come up, if we could have the first one. So the first question was, I have a food allergy myself. If we could put that up on the screen. I'm hoping that's appeared and I can see the results on my screen at my side. And it says that 11% of you have said yes, you have a food allergy, and no for 89%. So that's higher than the 2 to 3%, perhaps, that's prevalent in the population. So for those of you living with food allergy, thank you for responding as you've done. Second question, please. And that is, a member of my family has a food allergy. Well, that's starting to shoot up. Yes is now 29%, and no is 71%. So we all have somebody, I think, or many of us have somebody in our families with a food allergy. And that's really shown by the third poll question, please. And that was, I know someone with a food allergy. And the yes there coming in at 75%. So we all know, love, or are somebody with food allergy. And can I just say thank you if you're taking the lead in your local authority or your organisation, you've got a particular link to food allergy because it affects you. And equally, thank you if you aren't affected, you can see that many, many people are. Next slide, please. So just one more slide after this one. If one of us has a food allergy, we are all affected. It's a whole family, their whole dietary, shopping, everything is affected, where they can go out, whether they feel safe. It's not just one person, it's the whole family is affected. Next slide, please. And my final thought to leave you with, as I said at the start, Natasha's law is not about labelling, it's about life and death. This is about preventing unnecessary tragedies like Natasha ever happening again. And just to say once more, thank you for all you're doing to introduce Natasha's law. We know it's a lot of work, but don't think of it as labelling. Don't think of it as yet something else in all the business of the world we've got going on. This will save lives. And from Nadim, Tanya and myself, thank you for implementing Natasha's law.
So thank you, Tim. Thank you for your presentation. And it's important for everyone to understand the background to the reasons why this new change is important. I'd like now to introduce Arvind Tandy, who will now be running through the overview of the new pre-packed direct sales requirements. So welcome, Arvind.
Thank you. As Shushma said, I'll give you an overview of the new allergen information requirements for pre-packed for direct sale food, abbreviated to PPDS foods. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So just to say a bit about my role. So I work in the food hypersensitivity policy team in the FSA, and I work on projects in our food hypersensitivity programme that aim to improve the quality of life for consumers, and that includes the work on PPDS. Next slide, please. So firstly, just a reminder of the current requirements for the provision of allergen information. And as you'll know, the legislative framework around this is largely contained in the EU regulation on the provision of food information to consumers, abbreviated to the FIC. And we'll refer to the FIC during the session today. And when we do refer to this, please note that it's the retained version that applies in England, Wales and Scotland, but it's the current version of the EU regulation that applies in Northern Ireland because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So the Food Information for Consumer Regulation imposes a duty on food businesses to ensure that all mandatory food information on the 14 major allergens is accurate, available and easily accessible to the consumer. And the Food Information Regulations of 2014 that apply in England and equivalent regulations in the devolved administrations established the related enforcement measures in the UK. Next slide, please. So this slide summarises where we are now before October with the provision of allergen information. So currently, the FIC allows us to make a distinction between pre-packed and non-pre-packed food. So essentially, there are two different sets of requirements covering pre-packed and then non-pre-packed food. And pre-packed food is food that is packed by one business and supplied to another business, or that is packed by the same business at a different site. And pre-packed food must be labelled with a full ingredients list with any of the 14 major allergens emphasised in that list. And any food that doesn't fall within the FIC definition of pre-packed food is non-pre-packed food. So pre-packed food currently includes, so non-pre-packed food currently includes any food that is not in packaging or is packaged after being ordered by the consumer. And non-pre-packed food at the moment also includes food defined as pre-packed for direct sale. So that's food that is packaged at the same place it is offered before being ordered. So under the Food Information Regulations in the UK, food businesses currently have a choice in how they provide allergen information for non-pre-packed food to consumers. For example, it can be provided in a written form, verbally, or a combination of the two. Next slide, please. So following the campaign for Natasha's Law, the UK government introduced an amendment to the Food Information Regulations that apply in England. And this change happened in 2019 following a public consultation led by DEFRA. And some of the evidence gathered during that consultation showed that it's often difficult for some consumers to distinguish between pre-packed and pre-packed for direct sale foods, and that some consumers assume that the absence of allergen information on PPDS foods mean food allergens are not contained in the products. So following the change in England, which took account of the consultation evidence, Wales and Northern Ireland also introduced their own PPDS amendments in 2020, and Scotland introduced its amendments this year. So in all nations of the UK, the implementation date for the new PPDS requirements is 1st of October this year. Next slide, please. So this slide just illustrates what will happen from 1st of October onwards. So the PPDS amendments specify that food that is pre-packed for direct sale now has its own distinctive allergen information requirements, and these requirements are more similar to those that apply to pre-packed food. So these changes bring more consistency in the provision of allergen information between pre-packed and PPDS food. And so this slide illustrates that shift, that in allergen information terms, PPDS is now a distinct category of food. Next slide, please. So just to examine what exactly is PPDS food. So the term pre-packed for direct sale applies, as I said, to foods that have been packed on the same premises or site from which they are being sold or are being offered if no financial transaction takes place. And the food is packed before being ordered by the customer. And to note that the term site refers to a building complex, such as a shopping centre or airport terminal, in which the same food business operates from more than one unit within that building complex. But just also to note, PPDS foods also include foods packaged on other premises if the food is offered for sale from a movable or temporary premises, such as marquees, market stalls, or mobile sales vehicles, but by the same business that packed it. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that for food to be defined as PPDS, it has to meet the definition of pre-packed with regards to its packaging as set out in the Food Information for Consumers regulation. And this says pre-packed food means any single item for presentation as such to the final consumer, consisting of a food and the packaging in which it was put before being offered for sale, whether such packaging encloses the food completely or only partially, but in any event in such a way that the contents cannot be altered without opening or changing the packaging. So that's the legal definition to be aware of. Next slide, please. So to set that out in simpler terms, food is for PPDS, food is considered pre-packed when it is put into packaging before being offered for sale, and the food is fully or partly enclosed by the packaging. The contents cannot be altered without opening or changing the packaging, and the food is a single item, and a single item consisting of the food and its packaging that is ready for sale to the final consumer. Next page, next slide, please. So just to reflect on examples of what would meet this legal definition. So examples where this would apply and would make a food PPDS are any food that was completely packaged in cling film. For example, bread placed in a paper bag with the bag folded over or twisted to encase the bread, and sweets contained in a plastic bag that is tied with a knot or sealed. And to note, to meet this definition, the packaging does not have to be sealed, and it could include, for example, as I mentioned, paper bags that are folded over or twisted, or boxes that have tabs to shut them. Next slide, please. So the FSA has produced a decision tool which is available on our website to help businesses check whether any of the food they offer is PPDS. And it goes through 3 key questions. And if a business can answer yes to each one of them, then the food they produce is PPDS. So the 3 questions are: is the food presented to the customer in packaging? Is it packaged before the customer selects or orders it? And is it packaged at the same site as which it is sold? Or just to note, it's slightly different for mobile businesses, whether it's packed at a different location by the same business. So to say yes to all 3 criteria means the food is PPDS. Next slide, please. So sort of just to illustrate more which foods would fall under the PPDS definition. So sandwiches and bakery products that are packaged by the food business that are packaged and sold from the same premises and are packaged before a customer selects them. Fast food that is packaged before a customer orders it. And supermarket products packaged in stores such as pizzas, rotisserie chicken, and pre-weighed and packed cheeses and meats. Next slide, please. So foods that are not PPDS are illustrated here. So foods that are non-pre-packed, so food that is not in packaging when chosen, or food that is only packaged at the customer's request, is non-pre-packed and is not PPDS. And food that is packed at a different premises is not PPDS, but is pre-packed food. And just to be aware, the new PPDS requirements do not apply to food sold by means of distance selling, so over the food, phone or online. So for food sold in this way, the existing requirements for the provision of allergen information continue to apply. So with these food products, allergen information must be available to the consumer before the purchase is concluded and also at the moment of delivery. And these distance selling requirements are outlined in Article 14 of the FIC regulation. Next slide, please. So the change for PPDS food is that from 1st of October, PPDS food must display the name of the food and a list of the ingredients with the 14 major allergens emphasised every time they appear in the list, for example, by using capitals or bold text. And this information should be provided on the packaging or on a label fixed to the packaging. But just to note, there are differing requirements for packaging or containers that have a largest surface area of 10 centimetres squared, and these are set out in Article 16 of the FIC. And just to be aware, some foods are not required to bear a list of ingredients, and these are outlined in Article 19 of the FIC. And we do have a page on our website that provides more detail on labelling requirements to consider for PPDS food, depending on the specific ingredients used. Next slide, please. So in terms of labelling, one of the key things to note firstly is the name of the food. And Article 17 of the FIC sets out the naming requirements. And the name must provide consumers with an accurate description of the product. So first thing is to consider if there is a name prescribed in law, this must be used. In practice, this is only likely to apply to products containing certain seafood, fish and meat products in the ingredients. And then when there is no name prescribed in law, a customary name that is commonly understood may be used, for example, BLT sandwich. And where there is not a customary name, businesses should use a name that describes the true nature of the food, and so consumers can distinguish it from other products. And most products will fall into this category. Next slide, please. The ingredients list must be headed with the word ingredients or another suitable heading that contains the word ingredients, and it should be followed by a list of ingredients in the product with any allergens highlighted, the 14 mandatory allergens. All the ingredients used in making the product must be listed in descending order of weight at the time the product was made. And compound ingredients can be included in the list in order of weight, but a compound ingredient must be immediately followed by a list of its own ingredients. And the allergens must be emphasised within the ingredients list, and businesses should not use alternative allergen statements such as, say, contains milk and egg. Next slide, please. So just on some points to note on the format and font. So the information must appear, as I said, on the package or on a label attached to the package, and it must be on the outside of the package. And all the mandatory information must be easily visible, clearly legible, and not obscured in any way. And the font size has to comply with legal requirements for the minimum size of font. And these are contained in Annex 4 of the FIC regulation. And you can also see Article 13 of the regulation, which sets out requirements for the presentation of mandatory particulars. Next slide, please. And some of the practical considerations businesses might be considering, depending on their business models, are captured here. So firstly, just on handwriting, labels can be handwritten as long as they meet the requirements for font size and are clearly visible and legible. In terms of the production of labels, businesses might be considering software solutions or labelling programs and what equipment to use and what printers to use. And businesses will need to consider what systems and processes will be in place if their printing equipment malfunctions. Next slide, please. It's important to emphasise to businesses that the existing requirements on passing information along the chain continue to apply as outlined in Article 8 of the FIC. So food businesses and their suppliers should ensure that accurate ingredient and allergen information is passed to consumers. And food businesses should ensure that they have processes in place to update information if ingredients change in the products they use or if they change suppliers. Next slide, please. It's also important for businesses to consider the use of voluntary or precautionary allergen labelling, such as may contain statements for PPDS food. And these type of statements outline to consumers the unintentional presence of allergens, usually from unavoidable cross-contamination. For PPDS food, the FSA advises that these types of statements are best placed on the PPDS label, but it is possible for PPDS foods for this information to be communicated differently. So, for example, in writing on signs or on display or verbally by staff. Next slide, please. But this form of information should only be provided if a real risk of allergen cross-contact has been identified following a thorough risk assessment, and where the risk can't be removed through risk management actions, for example, segregation and cleaning. And to note, there isn't a legal definition of risk assessment, but we do have guidance on how to carry out a risk assessment in the FSA's Safer Food, Better Business documents. And precautionary allergen information from ingredient suppliers must be passed on to the consumer. And just to be aware that the use of this form of information when there's not a real risk could be considered misleading food information and can reduce choice for the food hypersensitive consumer. And this type of voluntary information is not a substitute for general good food hygiene and safety practices and should not be used as a general disclaimer. Next slide, please. So we have a few illustrative examples now of who PPDS affects or does not affect. So firstly, if you have a deli bar where customers can order a freshly filled baguette that is then put into packaging, does this need a label? So if the baguette is made to order and is put in packaging after the consumer orders it, you don't have to label the baguette. You have an opportunity there to have the conversation with the consumer on allergens and what's in the product. But you must provide information about the allergens present in the baguette by some other means, so either orally or in some form of written wording, so by means of a menu, ticket or sign. But if you do pre-pack any baguettes in anticipation of a lunchtime rush, say, then that would need PPDS labelling. Next slide, please. Another example here is if you're a home baker and you bake cakes to order, would you need to have PPDS labelling? So in this situation, you wouldn't. The cakes are made to order, so are not packed before the consumer orders them. And if your cakes are sold through distance selling, such as over the internet or by telephone, you must provide allergen information as specified, so before the point of sale and at the moment of delivery. And so this isn't affected by the new requirements, but you should continue to provide allergen information as you do now. Next slide, please. So in terms of schools and where you have a lunchtime food that is plated on demand, what happens then in terms of allergen information? So plating freshly cooked food, which is not pre-packed before the point it is ordered, this is considered non-pre-packed food, so it doesn't require labelling. But again, the information on allergens should still be provided in some form in writing or verbally. But if you have any foods in the school canteen that are packed on the site before being ordered by the students, such as sandwiches or salads, those would need PPDS labelling. And in terms of our advice to businesses, we do say that due to the varied nature of each food business model, we're encouraging food businesses to review the PPDS guidance available and that they can also obtain business-specific advice from their local authority. Next slide, please. So I'll now hand back to Shushma.
Arvin, thank you very much for that overview. It's very, very important in terms of all the information that you've conveyed in terms of the regulations. So very, very important session. I'd now like to welcome Steve Adey, who's going to talk about the approach to enforcement. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Shushma. I'm Steve Lewis Adey. I'm a policy manager within the FSA's regulatory policy team in Wales. I'm seconded into that role from the local authority auditor role, which audits local authority official food and feed controls. As a policy manager, I've been involved with making legislation in respect of food and feed legislation for as a consequence, really, of us leaving the EU. I've also been involved in labelling and common frameworks. I'm a trading standards officer by background and an ex-head of environmental health and trading standards at a Welsh local authority. So I've been involved in making legislation and I have a background in implementing and enforcing legislation. I'm going to talk to you about the enforcement aspects of these changes, and I'll be touching on the COVID-19 LA recovery plan, roles and responsibilities, expectations, assessing allergen compliance, enforcement options, examples of how LAs have prepared, and the FSA resources that are available. I'm going to start with a polling question, but I must say at the outset that we are aware that there are a small number of attendees who've been unable to vote in the poll, and apologies to those if you've been receiving an error message. Next slide, please. So my polling question is, how have you been helping local businesses in your area prepare for the changes? And you've got a number of options to be able to answer this question, and we'll cover your responses at the end of my section. Next slide, please. So, in terms of PPDS and the Local Authority Recovery Plan, the FSA has issued advice and guidance in a recovery plan for local authorities. This includes the following paragraph, in addition to other work identified in the plan. And this says, in the case of food standards, the impact on the business of the new requirements on allergen labelling for products PPDS that apply from the 1st of October should also be taken into account. And you'll find that under the table which sets out the expectations for local authorities in a note section. Our advice is the same whether this work is undertaken by food standards officers or food hygiene officers. And at the bottom of each of my slides, you'll find some supporting guidance or regulation. And here is the one for the COVID-19 Local Authority Recovery Plan. Next slide, please. Local authority roles and responsibilities. So local authorities in Wales and district councils in Northern Ireland will enforce these new responsibilities, as will Port Health where applicable. In England, however, district councils in the area of a county council will not have the power to enforce the new PPDS rules. Therefore, county councils and metropolitan district councils will enforce. Regulation 9.2 of the Food Information Regulations covering enforcement in England was not amended to cover the new requirements to list the ingredients, which was Regulation 5A, or to name the food, Regulation 6A. District councils can still provide advice and guidance to businesses. And it's very important to ensure that there's an agreed approach between district councils and county councils in terms of escalation procedures when instances of products are found which require enforcement action. And again, at the bottom of the slide, we've got some links to the regulations for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Next slide, please. So in terms of expectations for the enforcement approach and sanctions, what we're saying is that local authorities are advised to work with businesses and to provide advice and guidance in the first instance, resources permitting. Where local authorities find the PPDS allergen labelling requirements are not being complied with, you should take a proportionate and risk-based approach to enforcement. In deciding what approach to take, you should, as you already do, take into account, amongst other things, the seriousness of any non-compliances and the attitude and willingness of the food business to correct any problems. That is to say, a graduated, proportionate approach based upon the Food Law Code of Practice and your enforcement policy. Next slide, please. In terms of assessing allergen compliance, assessing allergen compliance is a fundamental part of every food standards and food hygiene intervention where relevant, including for low-risk businesses where alternative enforcement strategies may be used and when conducting non-official controls. So first and foremost, there is a need to ensure that PPDS is covered, whether by food standards or by food hygiene officers. And again, you've got a number of supporting documents at the bottom, including the local authority allergen Q&A, which you can find on the Smarter Communications platform. Next slide, please. In terms of enforcement options, in line with the Food Law Code of Practice and your enforcement policies, you are aware that this can include advice and guidance, warnings, simple cautions, through to prosecutions. And we would expect each case to be determined on its own merits. In addition, a food information regulations improvement notice may be served. Thank you. Next slide, please. How local authorities have been engaging businesses on PPDS. So the FSA has been informed of many good examples of where local authorities have been preparing with businesses. And we've only been able to include a small number here. Norfolk have updated fact sheets for inspections and their website, and they've shared this with environmental health officers. They've also trained officers and contacted affiliated organisations such as schools. Trading Standards Southwest have organised free seminars across 14 authorities, training 147 officers, and they've been working on a pack for home producers, which covers PPDS and other issues. Caerphilly have produced a training video, and there's a link to it there in brackets, and handouts, and they've translated this into 9 languages. In addition, they've led on the development of an online allergen resource aimed at local authorities, food businesses, and educational establishments. This will be hosted on the Chartered Trading Standards Institute website from the 8th of September, and it will be available for use by all local authorities in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and that has been translated into 8 languages. It includes the videos A Day in the Life of Chloe and Megan's Story, which are Lancashire County Council resources. For Northern Ireland, Antrim and Newtown Abbey Borough Council have been offering one-to-one advice visits. Also, a working group has been established in Northern Ireland specifically for Prepacked for direct sale, which includes the FSA, the district councils, and the College of Agriculture, Food and Rural Enterprises to ensure preparedness. Next slide, please. So, available resources. In preparation for the 1st of October, the FSA has developed a number of resources for local authorities and businesses, which include a PPDS toolkit, and in that there's an introduction to PPDS changes, there's labelling guidance, technical guidance, and an allergens labelling decision tool. We've also developed a quick PPDS guide and 7 sector-specific guides to help to reach businesses. This includes butchers, bakers, mobile sellers, fast food and takeaways, caterers, schools, colleges, nurseries and restaurants, cafes and pubs. There's also a PPDS section that's been created on the Smarter Communications platform, which includes the Allergen Q&A, which has content on PPDS, and that will be regularly revised. And no doubt at the end of this webinar, there'll be many questions that will be added to that in the future. That is updated in response to local authorities' queries. The latest revisions will be published again shortly. There are also food allergy and intolerance e-training for local authorities and food business, including PPDS content. The practice guidance update for PPDS and PAL is out for consultation at present and will be published shortly after that. And finally, allergen guidance for food businesses and an allergen checklist for food businesses. And again, at the bottom in blue, we put a couple of links to where you can access these supporting documents. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of the polling results, just quickly have a look at the results. So email updated businesses, 15% of authorities have done that. Webinars, online events and seminars, 5% of authorities. Newsletters, 13% of authorities. Social media, 16% of authorities. During inspections, 70% of authorities. Developing content as fact sheets or animations, 5%. Sharing of FSA content and tools, 41%. Other, 7%. In terms of not having communicated yet with local food businesses, 23%. But there is 2 months to go. And that concludes my section of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Great presentation, and so useful in context of the resources that are currently available and will be updated and be made available. So let's move now on to Mark Geraghty, who's going to go through some of the common questions that have been raised with us over a good few months and the sort of advice we've been giving on them. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sushma. Next slide, please. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Geraghty. I joined the Food Type Sensitivity team in March this year. My background comes primarily from operations and delivering official controls in the meat, dairy and wine industry. This afternoon, I'm going to go through a series of common questions that the FSA have received regarding PPDS. I'll describe the query and provide the rationale for our advice on each of the matters. Next slide, please. So before I begin, I have a polling question I would like to ask. It will be interesting to have an idea or understanding of the different sectors that you have received the most queries from. So from what sector are you receiving the most queries? I've put some suggestions down as multiple choice, as well as an other box to capture any sectors I may not have included. This information will help us to refine and target our resources for yourselves and for businesses as we approach the implementation date. We will review the results at the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'll be talking about packaging and the specific queries we've had on what is and what is not PPDS food. Firstly, we know that in order for packaging to meet the requirements for PPDS, it needs to meet the legislative criteria of Prepacked. We know this to mean any single item for presentation as such to the final consumer and to mass caterers, consisting of a food and the packaging into which it was put before being offered for sale, whether such packaging encloses the food completely or partially, in any event in such a way that the contents cannot be altered without opening or changing the packaging. So to determine whether packaging meets the definition of Prepacked, we have to assess whether it meets the 4 elements. Firstly, is it a single item for presentation? Secondly, was it packaged before being offered for sale? Is the food completely or partially enclosed? And the food cannot be altered without opening or changing the product. If the answer to all 4 questions are yes, then the food meets the pre-packed definition. What we've got to remember is that we only have the legal definition for pre-packed. Therefore, if packaging does not meet all the requirements of this definition, then it arguably must be non-pre-packed food. So let's just go through a couple of examples. Firstly, a typical packaged sandwich on display at a cafe or sandwich shop. Is it a single item for presentation? Yes, it is. Was it packaged before being offered for sale? Yes, it was, by the same food business on the same site. Is the food completely or partially enclosed? Yes, it's completely enclosed. And the food cannot be altered without opening or changing the product? Yes, the food cannot be accessed until it is opened. This example meets the definition of pre-packed, and because it was packaged by the same food business on the same site, it is therefore PPDS. That example we should all feel fairly confident with, as sandwiches are a common food to be affected by the PPDS regulations. So now let's explore the baguette in a cardboard sleeve scenario. Is it a single item for presentation? Yes, it is. Was it packaged before being offered for sale? Yes, it was, by the same food business on the same site. Is the food completely or partially enclosed? No, it is open at either side. The food cannot be altered without opening or changing the product? No, because you can easily access the product without needing to open or change the packaging. This example does not meet the definition of pre-packed because the baguette is not completely or partially enclosed, and the baguette can be altered without needing to open or change the packaging. This is therefore non-pre-packed food. With cling film, we know that this is a multifunctional product that is often used in a food environment for a number of reasons. This includes, and not limited to, hygiene reasons and the ease of transporting food, to name a few. However, some businesses may choose to use cling film as a way to package food products. For example, a business may decide to package individual brownies they have made in-store in cling film and present these to consumers for sale. This would meet the definition of pre-packed as it ticks all the criteria under this definition and would therefore be considered PPDS. This is similar if the food business were to have on display a plate of food that is wrapped in cling film, is a single item and meets the criteria of pre-packed. This too would be considered PPDS. A key consideration here, in addition to the other elements of pre-packed, is the term presentation to the final consumer. In the examples above, cling film is being used as a type of packaging. It's used to package a product that was made by the food business on the same site and meets the pre-packed definition, making it PPDS. If an item is removed from cling film before it is presented to the consumer, then this is not PPDS food. This is non-pre-packed food. Similar to cling film, domes also have a multifunctional purpose. So in order to determine whether food presented in a dome is PPDS, we have to look to the definition of pre-packed. If the food under a dome is a single item consisting of food and the packaging it is placed in and is ready for presentation to the consumer, then this is PPDS food. If the dome is removed before the food is presented to the consumer, then this is not PPDS. This is non-pre-packed food. As an example, if you have a slice of cake, or say a portion of sushi, covered with a protective dome that is presented to the consumer with the dome on, this is PPDS food. If you have a large cake under a dome, where the intention is to slice it into individual portions and serve on a separate plate, this would not be PPDS, as a large cake and the packaging it was stored in is not a single item. This is non-pre-packed food. Similarly, if a food business was to have on display multiple individual slices of brownies under one glass dome, but the intention is to remove brownies from the dome and then to sell the individual brownies separately, this too would not be PPDS, as a display of multiple single items is not a single item for presentation to the final consumer. We do appreciate the complexities that arise with PPDS, and we are hoping to develop a bank of photographs to illustrate what is and isn't PPDS. We welcome local authorities sending us your photographs of real-world examples. Next slide, please. We have received a few different queries in relation to distance sales and how this fits in with PPDS. We know that the requirement for a label of the list of ingredients does not apply to PPDS foods sold via distance selling, such as online or telephone. because the national applicable rules to the provision of food information for non-prepacked food, including PPDS, do not apply to food sold via distance means. Relevant information on distance sales comes from Article 14 of the FIC, where we know that PPDS food sold in this way must continue to have allergen information available for free to the customer before they buy the product and also at the moment of delivery. With this in mind, there are some scenarios where businesses have queried distance sales in PPDS. This includes fast food drive-thrus and hotel room service. When determining whether these scenarios are distance selling or not, we have to look at Article 14 of the FIC, which mentions pre-packed food offered for sale by means of distance communication. Article 2 in the FIC defines means of distance communication as without the simultaneous physical presence of the supplier and consumer. In addition to this, we know that the PPDS legislation requires PPDS food to be made on the same site at which it is sold by the same food business to meet the requirements. The element of site refers to a building complex, such as a shopping centre or airport terminal, in which the same food business operates from more than one unit within a building complex. The FSA therefore conclude that it is reasonable to suggest that customers or consumers at fast food drive-thrus and in hotels are on the same sites where the food may be packed before being offered for sale. The FSA also conclude that it is reasonable to suggest that there is simultaneous presence of the supplier and the consumer in these scenarios. Therefore, based on this, the FSA do not consider fast food drive-thrus or hotel room service to be a distance sale. So any PPDS food made in these contexts will need to have PPDS labelling. Next slide, please. The next aspect of distance sales is the increase in business models that include a too good to go element, also seen as a magic bag or mystery box of food. We've received queries as to whether businesses need to adhere to the requirements of PPDS or not. The FSA do consider the sale of magic bags ordered online or through an app, but then collected in person as a distance sale. This is because the food is ordered without the simultaneous presence of the supplier and the consumer. The difficulty here remains with how to meet the requirements of distance sales to ensure that allergen information is available for free before consumers buy the product and so it is available at the moment of delivery. What businesses must ensure is that they have processes in place to make this mandatory information available to consumers. This can include clear and legible messaging to instruct consumers with an allergy, intolerance, or hypersensitivity to contact the business directly prior to placing an order. As this business concept is fairly new and becoming quite a popular model, the FSA will be looking deeper into the use of too good to go or magic bags, and will be looking to provide more guidance into the use of this concept. Next slide, please. Food sold via vending machines are exempt from the food information regulations and so don't need to have PPDS labels. The applicable requirements for food sold via vending machine are contained within Article 14 of the FIC. For non-prepacked and PPDS food, the requirements listed in Article 44 of the FIC will be applicable for non-prepacked food sold via a vending machine. Therefore, you're required to provide information about the use of the 14 allergens if they are present in a food. You're not required to provide a full ingredients list. For prepacked, PPDS and non-prepacked food, the distance selling rule to provide information before the purchase is concluded does not apply to prepacked food sold through vending machines. Prepacked food sold in vending machines is already likely to have full labelling required on the product itself. Next slide, please. Another query we have received in relation to PPDS is the impact on food donations and what businesses will need to do in order to meet the legislative requirements. Firstly, an important aspect to note is that the term direct sale in PPDS means direct to the final consumer. Therefore, this is not applicable to business-to-business transactions. With this said, the gifting of any surplus food by a business to another business, for example, a restaurant to a charity, where the charity is registered as a food business in their own right, should be treated the same way after the 1st of October as it is now. The key element here is the business-to-business aspect. For example, where a food business donates pre-packed food to another food business, the pre-packed food will already have all the mandatory information required to then sell, give away, or donate to the final consumer. If a food business donates PPDS food to another business, the PPDS food will now become pre-packed food. because of the business-to-business transaction. Therefore, the receiving business will need to ensure that the food is labelled correctly for pre-packed food before selling, giving away or donating. Where a food business donates non-pre-packed food to another food business, and the receiving food business intends to pack the food as per Article 22E, the pre-packed definition, then this would become PPDS food and will need to adhere to the requirements of PPDS, including a full ingredients list. This can be challenging for receiving food businesses if they haven't received the correct information to allow them to label as per the requirements. Businesses should be reminded of their responsibilities under Article 8 of the FIC to ensure information is passed along the chain, and where appropriate, work collaboratively to ensure receiving food businesses are equipped with the information they need. Next slide, please. The last query I'll go through is from food businesses asking how they can compile an ingredients list when they've not necessarily had to do this before. Key elements to consider include thinking about the process, order and volume. For example, how you made the product, in what order did you add the ingredients and how much. Thinking about this basic process is a good way to start assessing how you make the product and how you can list what's in the product. The FSA does have a good label training e-learning available on our website, which includes 13 different learning packages on labelling. The learning package on ingredients, lists, quantities and allergens will be particularly useful for PPDS labelling. There is an interactive label amongst other tools and tips available to anyone involved in labelling. We also have published labelling guidance on PPDS to support businesses in understanding the specific requirements for labelling PPDS products and the difference to pre-packed. In addition to these, DEFRA have a series of guidance available on gov.uk to support food businesses. Next slide, please. So at the start of my section, I asked you the polling question, which was, what sector are you receiving the most queries? The results should be popping up on your screen now. I can see them on my side. It looks like the main sort of sectors that you've received queries from, looking at fast food and takeaways at 21% and caterers at 22%. It does seem quite fairly balanced across the majority of the sectors. And I'd be interested to hear what the other sectors at 8% are. And I will be sending an evaluation form, but also utilising our dedicated PPDS mailbox. It'll be useful to hear what other sectors and what other queries you are receiving. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll now pass back to Sushma.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's been very, very informative in terms of the common questions and actually the queries that people are encountering in the lead up to the pre-packed direct sales regulations and its implementation. So we now got a Q&A session. So I'd like to welcome back our panel, Tim. I'd like to take the opportunity of introducing Callum Ewell, who's from Food Standards Scotland, and Arvid Tandy for our Q&A session. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's open to you to actually put in any questions that you wish, you would like to have raised with the panel. Please use the submit a question section on the delegate area to put forward your questions. So can I welcome the panel back, and let's start kicking off with our questions. So to start off with, at the beginning, we did actually have some questions which were submitted in advance of our webinar. So let's start off with a couple of those questions whilst we get delegates submitting their further queries. So I think this one really is for Arvind. Arvind, could you provide examples of products in packaging that are not pre-packed, such as packaged in a way that food can be altered without opening or changing the packaging, and how a bag is not classed as PPDS, but if the corners are twisted, it is?
Yes, so hopefully the examples that we've raised during the presentations have helped to illuminate that definition of pre-packed with regards to packaging. So just to remind you of the elements of that. So the food has to be a single item, and the packaging needs to enclose the food completely or partially, so the content can't be altered without opening or changing the packaging. So now that's sort of quite a technical definition. But some examples to illustrate that point is that when a food would be non-pre-packed and so wouldn't meet the PPDS definition is, for example, if you had a food served like a bacon roll served on a napkin, that the sort of, if you construe the napkin as packaging, it doesn't encase the food completely or partially so that you can't change the packaging. You can't alter the food without opening or changing the packaging. The food is just flat on a napkin and you can easily access the food. In a similar way, hot dogs served on an open polystyrene tray or on an open cardboard tray can be accessed. So you could alter the food without opening or changing that packaging. And also any chips, for example, served in an open bag. There is a distinct, so in one context, you might have food in a paper bag and it's open. So the food again can be accessed without opening or changing the packaging. But if you twisted the tops of the paper bag or folded it over, you would have to alter the packaging to access the food within it. So it would meet the PPDS criteria. So yeah, in one instance, a paper bag wouldn't meet the PPDS criteria, but in another instance, if you folded it over or twisted it, it would. And it's that definition of altering the food without opening or change. So you can't alter the packaging you can't alter the food without opening or changing the packaging. So I think that's the elements to particularly be aware of.
Thank you, Arvind. I think you've illustrated how complicated and complex this can be depending on what you're faced with. So the mere fact that you have a brown bag which is open and you can just take the foodstuffs out is not PPDS, whereas if I were to twist it, it becomes PPDS. So you can understand the level of complexity that's involved in this particular area. So thank you very much for clarifying that. I think the next question should be for Steve. Steve, are there any exemptions to following the PPDS rules, such as home bakers or volunteer food distributors who provide hot food provisions that may currently be bagged or packed meals for rough sleepers and families in need? Steve.
Thank you, Shashma. I can say that there are no exemptions for any business types under the PPDS requirements. All businesses, including the voluntary sector, will need to comply from the 1st of October, and that includes home bakers, charities, and micro businesses.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, so in that regard, you've just sort of, to an extent, clarified that there aren't any exemptions, that it does apply outside of, I think, what Mark has indicated as being the business-to-business element, which he explained. So thank you very much for clarifying that particular question, and hopefully that provides the answer to the person who put forward that question. Let's move on to the third question that we've got in the running order. Can you clarify whether pots of sauces sold with a takeaway meal are classed as PPDS when the business packages them before the sale transaction, and to also include salad garnishes and prawn crackers? So we've encountered this so many times when you go and, you know, nice piece of cucumber on a garnish. With the food that's you're served, and the prawn crackers, as many of us have on a regular basis. Arvind, would you like to pick that question up, please?
Yes, so any food that is packaged before the customer orders it will need to meet the PP, and as long as it meets the overall definition, is PPDS food. So in general, with takeaways, most of the food they produce should be food made to order or is only packaged after the customer has made an order. So it should be non-pre-packed food. But for any sauces or anything that's placed in containers before customers order them, they will be PPDS food. The exception here is distance selling. So in that instance, the distance selling requirements apply. It's also important to note that there is a small packaging caveat, which is in, as I mentioned earlier, which is in the Food Information for Consumers regulation. So where you have food packaging or a container's largest surface area is less than 10 centimetres squared, the ingredients list can be admitted, provided that the ingredients list information is provided by other means or made available at the consumer's request. But you do have to label the packaging with the 14 allergens, and so you can say contains milk and egg. And there's also, you need to take account of the specifications for minimum font size. So in general, any food that is packaged before the customer orders it, including small pots of sauces, would generally be PPDS, but to make a note of that FIC provision for anything with a surface area less than 10 centimetres squared.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And that's something that I think a lot of people will encounter, principally because of the sorts of foods that are accompanied by things like sauces and garnishes. So I think that's a useful piece of clarification, I think, Arvin, in relation to it. Let's move on to the next question. With regards to school canteens, can you provide more information as to when a packed lunch prepared by a school will need to be labelled or not? For example, packed lunches are made on site for the children to collect as they're caught. Are these caught by PPDS legislation? I think, Steve, could you please pick that question up, please?
Sure, there's a bit of a long answer here, unfortunately. PPDS allergen labelling changes only affect food that is packed and sold or offered at your site. If packed lunches are made on school premises in anticipation of an event, such as a school trip, the allergen information requirements may vary. If the lunches are made and packed to order, these are not pre-packed and therefore not PPDS. If, however, the school lunches are made and packed without specific orders from individual children, then these would need to comply with the new PPDS labelling requirements. If there are multiple items in a packed lunch, you will need to provide allergen information for each item. You will need to label each PPDS item individually. It's also worth noting that if there is a menu cycle, so many weeks, and you have the same menu cycling and cycling over, or the order is made by parents, this would not be considered pre-packed for direct sale if the food has been ordered before being packaged for the individual. Food businesses should continue to make allergen information available to parents and students as you do now. However, if parents are paying for food in advance and have not made any specific orders, then the food could be considered pre-packed for direct sale, depending on and if how it is packaged before being chosen by the student. So quite a long answer there.
No, thank you very much for that, Steve. Understand that it's quite a complicated area, and in relation to sort of if parents are paying for food in advance and have not made specific orders. So there are very, very great complications and things that need to be considered as part and parcel of that. I'd like to bring in Callum and you, Steve, also, and Arvin for our next question, which I think it really sort of covers the aspects that you have put forward, particularly from a Food Scotland, Standard Scotland perspective, Welsh perspective, and also a general perspective and overview. So what guidance will be produced to help small businesses comply with the requirements to list ingredients? Will the FSA start a media campaign to inform businesses before October 2021? And how will the FSA reach small businesses? Very important question in terms of a lot of businesses involved in catering, etc., tend to be small businesses. So I'd welcome a comment from you. So shall we start with Callum? Callum.
Hi there. Yeah, we're conscious at FSS that many of the businesses in Scotland are small businesses. So in line with that, we have been working on a business-specific guidance for industry that we've worked in conjunction with local authorities for their input, and also with industry to ensure that the guidance we're producing is sort of giving them the information that they need. This is going to be published very soon. We've also been working with the Scottish Grocers Federation on a retailer guide, which is along the same lines, but we felt that they would potentially have a bigger reach into those smaller businesses than perhaps we might be able to have through their membership. And again, that guidance will be issued fairly soon. And in terms of sort of media and getting the message out there, we are planning on doing some radio advertising to kind of try and capture as broad an audience as possible. It's mainly focused at businesses, but I mean, being radio, everyone listens to the radio, so everyone will hear it. We are also going out to various industry bodies to again try and tap into the memberships that they have that are just much more far-reaching than we can potentially get into, and we are hoping by using them, and we will be able to reach more of those small businesses than perhaps we might be able to. And we'll also be doing social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., as well, to reinforce the messaging.
Yeah, thank you for that, Callum. A lot of activity and a lot of work with small businesses. It's great to hear. Steve, from the Welsh perspective.
Thank you. What we will be doing is working as a one FSA approach, really. Northern Ireland, England and ourselves will be in the run-up to implementation. We'll be supporting small and medium businesses, alerting them to the upcoming changes and providing guidance, enabling them to act. To do this, we'll be undertaking some online advertising to direct them to the PPDS hub on food.gov. We'll be using trade media, using the sector guidance and labelling guidance to sell in a tailored news story related to that sector. We will partner hosted webinars, and we'll have proactive engagement with local authorities, stakeholders and partners, including toolkit containing key messages, links to guidance, news stories and relevant assets. There's also a quick guide to PPDS as well.
Thank you, Steve. Arvind, do you have anything to add or in addition to comments from Callum and Steve?
Yeah, I think Steve's highlighted a lot of the cross-FSA activities that we've been carrying out, and we've got plans close as the 1st of October. So just to reassure that there will be messages targeted at consumers closer to the 1st of October implementation date. And as Steve said, that's lots of social media work and work with media. Anyone interested in covering PPDS will be working with them to give them information on the rules and how the changes will affect consumers. And just to say that we did have a 1 year to go campaign that was launched in October last year, where at that time we did put a lot of new resources on our website for businesses and local authorities. And we've recently put some more information, and we'll constantly sort of check the resources that we're providing and making sure that they're okay. We're also doing a lot of work to reach partners in a similar way to that Callum mentioned, who've got a greater reach to social, to small and to SMEs than we have. So that work has been pretty consistent since October last year, and we've got a lot of good links, and we're disseminating our messages and our resources whenever we can.
No, thank you for that, Harvin. I think it's very, very important, the continuum of activity to get the message out that this change is happening and what it might need for businesses to consider is a continuum, and it will be so until the date of implementation. So it's important. All these activities actually show how seriously this is taken and how we're trying to work with local authorities and food businesses to bring them up to speed with the changes afoot. So I'm afraid that, I mean, this is going to be another question for you. principally because of the nature of the sorts of things that people on the call and on this webinar are actually encountering. So what will happen in, say, a pizza takeaway premises where the pizza itself is not PPDS, but pots of sauce are made up in advance and provided, the extra part as an extra part of the dish. So you and I know when I have a takeaway pizza, I do get these little pots of garlic and whatever sauces as a dip. So will the pot need labelling? I think you've dealt with this question a little bit, but if you can just clarify, I think that would be really helpful for the individual.
Yeah, I think where you do have a pot that's already packed and you're putting it together with something that's non-pre-packed, that pot will still need to have the PPDS labelling. But just to bear in mind that caveat around anything with a surface area less than 10 centimetres squared. So in that instance, if it is smaller than that, then it won't need full labelling as long as the ingredients information can be provided in another form, but the allergens will need to be highlighted on that pot.
Okay, thank you for that, Arvind, and thank you for that clarification, because that's a similar question that's arisen. So it may be something that requires some homing in terms of the explanation. So to just give you a little bit of a break, I'd like to ask Steve, will unitary councils still enforce?
Yes, is the answer to that. The only authorities who will not be able to enforce post 1st of October are district councils in the area of a county council. All other authorities will be able to enforce.
Thank you. So a particular question from somebody who's highlighting some key points that have arisen on and off over the period of this year and last year. We have limited resources and have a massive backlog on food hygiene work due to the pandemic. We know, as I mentioned at the beginning, we know how challenging all of this has been for local authorities. Is there any plans to provide additional resourcing or funding to local authorities to assist in implementing any required visits, as this will add additional work to those who are expected to undertake these inspections? So Steve, before I come to you, could I ask Arvind to address this particular question?
Yes, so you'll be aware in England there is a requirement for government to fund any new burdens that are placed on local authorities. So for English local authorities, there will be some new burdens payments being made related to PPDS. So DEFRA will be leading on that, but those payments will cover, there'll be a one-off payment to cover familiarisation, so the activities you've needed to do to get up to date with the PPDS requirements. So that'll be the equivalent of one year's worth of funding. But there's also, we recognise, ongoing enforcement costs related to PPDS as well. So there will be also, together with the familiarisation payments, there will also be an enforcement related payment that will be made to cover 2021 to 22. And in subsequent years, that payment to local authorities to take account of that PPDS enforcement responsibility will be rolled over into should be rolled over into the local authority grant that is paid by MHCLG each year. And the costs, the calculation figures are sort of based on an impact assessment that was done at the time DEFRA did its consultation in 2019. So you can have a look at that and see what costs were estimated for different people, for businesses, but also for government and local authorities. So that has been taken as the starting point to make those calculations. Now we're hoping the payment for 2021-22 will be made to English local authorities in the next couple of months, and it should be made by DEFRA. So that is one more concrete way that there's some support will reach local authorities in England. But for local authorities in Northern Ireland and Wales, I know they don't have the same legislative, the government doesn't have the same legislative requirements to cover new burdens costs, but we can check what's happening if there's sort of any developments on that in relation to Wales and Northern Ireland. And I don't know if Callum has any sort of observations on that for Scotland.
It's not something I've been involved in or I could really comment on, I'm afraid. It's probably a bit more senior level than I am, unfortunately.
That's fine, Callum. That's not a problem at all. I mean, so effectively, it's saying that we're mindful that local authorities and the inspections and the additional work that may arise, and it may just not necessarily be an enormous amount of additional work, has been considered as part of the overall legislative process. Steve, can I come to you? So you answered the question about the unitary authority, and you've sort of answered it very succinctly in context of the enforcement. So can I just ask a further question on the back of that? Can you give any advice in relation to the division of enforcement responsibility, where you've got two-tier local authorities, separate food hygiene, food standards, between the environmental health and trading standards departments? Steve?
Yeah, the importance, as I set out in my section, really, the important is agreeing who will do what, collaborating. I also said that PPDS should be part of every inspection, whether that's an environmental health or trading standards inspection. Both could issue advice and guidance, but really agree to work out who will enforce and take the enforcement actions that may be required. So to summarise, just agree between yourselves, collaborate, and escalate to whoever is going to be the lead on it.
Thank you. Tim, you've been sitting very patiently. Here's a question for you, Tim. The example of an open-ended cardboard sleeve for a baguette is a similar scenario to the incident that resulted in Natasha's tragic death, consuming the allergen. The law closed one loophole but leaves another open. Are there plans to address this?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the Secretary of State for DEFRA or any government minister, but what I can do is say from Natasha's foundation. So while Natasha's death was an absolute tragedy, it related, and Natasha's law and all that we've been talking about with PPDS this afternoon is about the labelling that is on a product. So if a product looks sealed or is sealed and has a label on it, it's being able to trust that. And that's what this law does. There are many other servings of foods where allergens do not have to be listed. So we've talked about fresh foods and restaurants. And when I say allergens, I mean allergens beyond the 14 prescribed in law. And certainly we've been hearing from families that they're allergic to things outside of the 14. So I think loophole is the wrong word. I think the best words to use are full ingredient labelling on all foods wherever they appear, ultimately. That's what Natasha's Foundation would like to see. However, expecting that, hoping for that, needs to come in stages. And this is a first stage which has been worked on so hard by so many people. So I would say, where there is a product that's covered by PPDS legislation, individuals with a food allergy can have greater confidence. The other ways that food is served, whether there are actual allergens in them, whether they're in the 14 or not, is another campaign, another challenge further on in the future. And I wouldn't think that my colleagues at the FSA will thank me if I say that we're able to start on that any sooner than the government makes an announcement upon it. But from our perspective, from Natasha's Foundation, we'd like to see it on wherever a food allergen, wherever any allergen can appear, But Natasha's law is a step in the right direction to give choice whether there are those sealed products, as Arvind and colleagues have so helpfully explained this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks very much for Tim and that response, and actually clarifying that actually it's a bigger, bolder question than perhaps just pre-packed direct sales, which is stage one in the process. So we've got the questions. Please keep them coming through. It's very, very informative and helpful for colleagues to listen to what these questions are. So there's one here about QR codes that we've received. What is the opinion on QR codes being used for information access to labelling? This is particularly important for large or complex operations where labelling information may change and hence make label information incorrect. Steve, would you like to take this question, please? And also, I'd like to hear Arvind's view on this.
Yes, okay. What I would say really is that the information needs to be easily accessible by the person purchasing the product. So if they're not able to access it, or if they didn't have their phone on them, for example, I wouldn't rely on it as the sole source of information.
Arvind?
I mean, I think it's interesting, the development in technology and what that means for the provision of allergen information. And there might be lots of ways in which sort of government and regulators will need to keep up with the different ways in which information is provided. In terms of the legislation as it currently stands, we have had some questions saying whether a QR code would be sufficient to provide the information needed for PPDS. And as Steve has explained, no, it's not. You know, you can't rely on a QR code. I mean, you could have it in addition to labelling if you wanted to. I think there's also a matter about monitoring allergens and ingredients through the supply chain. And I know some businesses have commented on the complexity of that. And I suppose the sort of most laborious process to sort of make sure you know what's in the food is to check the labels. And you might have sort of technological processes or databases which allow you to know what's in products too. But I think the fail-safe method is also to check the packaging of the ingredients that you're using when you're making food. But at the moment, QR codes can't. There might be an extra tool that we use in addition to labelling, but at the moment they can't replace the current requirements.
Thanks, Arvind. That's an important question in view of the development of technology and QR codes now being the norm when people are either eating out or actually sort of purchasing, and therefore I think that's an important question that's been raised. And yeah, thank you for your answer to it. I think if I could just add, outside of just relying on the labelling and pre-packed direct sale regulations, etc., individuals who suffer from allergies should not forget that the best way is to ask, and make it known. And the conversation is very, very important outside of everything. If in doubt, ask. If in doubt, raise and have that conversation, which is very, very important. But that's very, very, very clear answer, Arvind. Hopefully that's provided sufficient information to the questioner. Callum, I think we should also now ask you a question, and if you could answer this. Would an order taken over the telephone to a takeaway and subsequently delivered to a customer's home be considered as distance selling?
Yes, is the short answer to my mind, at least. It would be considered distance selling, and it's important to remember for distance selling that the business is still required to provide the same information to the consumer before the point of sale as they would if the consumer was purchasing that food in person. So that means ensuring that allergen information is available, as I said, before the point of sale, and also ensuring that information is available again at the moment of delivery.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so that's clarifying the point that's been made during all the presentations around distance sellings at the point of sale and at the point of delivery, and how it applies to or doesn't apply to PPDS and its application. So thank you very much for clarifying that. Arvind, you spoke about labels and software in your presentation. So I think if you could please pick up this question. Where a business generates labels on site on a daily basis using IT and a printer to ensure accurate information and labeling, what and up-to-date information, and there's a printer on site which has resulted in a label being unable to be applied to the product. So you've got the facilities, you're producing it, but you can't apply it to the product. In the short term, the business will not be compliant. Will you be able to discuss the expected enforcement action for this?
So I think it's important for businesses, depending on their business model, to think about the contingencies they'll have in place. For example, if printers aren't functioning and they can't label the foods that they want to. I suppose alternatives could be, your contingency might be that for certain products you would, if that happens, your contingency might be that you sold it as non-pre-packed food. So that could be one way of dealing with it. I suppose, and if you did go ahead and sell it without labelling, in terms of enforcement approach, I assume the local authority would want to take a proportionate approach to that. That if it was a one-off incident, maybe that would be okay. But if it was sort of a regular and consistent thing, maybe that wouldn't be as okay. But I think it might be good for each business model just to think through what alternatives there could be. And one of those would be selling as non-pre-packed food. But I don't know if Steve's got any thoughts on how you'd enforce in that context.
Yes, I think really we couldn't afford the risk really of the business being not compliant with the allergy labelling. As Arvind has said, there are other options, and they could choose to write the labels out if that is possible, depending on the numbers of products that they're producing. Alternatively, they, as suggested in the question, they may need to remove them from sale. If a business were to sell non-compliant product knowingly, then potentially they could be facing prosecution.
Yeah, so I mean, you make a very important point on that, Steve, i.e. knowingly, and how you balance that against proportionality, etc. So yeah. It's an important point, and it could easily happen. Anyone has a breakdown in terms of the work environment. To the person who asked, will the slides be made available? I can confirm, yes, they will be, and we'll see how best we can provide the slides to those who are participating in this webinar. Tim, you thought you'd only have a limited number of questions, but I have another question for you, Tim. Is there a fear that many businesses may change the way they operate so their foods are classed as non-pre-packed and outside the scope of PPDS? So, Tim, I'd like a view from you on that.
Yes, it is a fear, and yes, we have seen it. The reality is that some businesses will choose to avoid this legislation by adapting what they do. That comes back to my point about the need for full ingredient labelling on all foods. That's the ultimate goal that we are calling for eventually. We've seen signs going up on some cafes saying, do not enter if you have an allergy. Now that is the kind of signage we saw in years gone by on subjects that are now covered by discrimination and equalities legislation. So I think it's pretty disgusting if that's being put outside establishments saying you're not welcome. I think the big answer to that question is, if we think of our poll earlier today, which was, do you have a food allergy? And it was 11%. Does a member of your family have a food allergy? And it was 29%. And do you know someone with a food allergy? Was 75%. That's an awful lot of market that you are turning away by actually not managing allergens appropriately and being inclusive and making it possible for people with a food allergy to have a safe choice. So if you want to turn away 29% of your business, because that could be a member of someone's family because they've got a food allergy, I think you're a brave business to adapt so far. So in the spirit of the law, this is where we're going to keep people safe. So do think of actually what this is all about. And it comes back to my point. This is not about labelling. This is not about legislation. This is not about more work for businesses, especially at this time. This is about life and death.
Yeah, it's a very, very important point that you make, and actually sort of highlight the sort of practices that have evolved and are evolving about having waivers or saying, sorry, we can't serve you. So somewhat unfortunate, and yes, it's important to give due consideration to the requirements and the mandation on allergen management, really, and how important and significant this is. Steve, I'm mindful that we've got a few minutes. I'll try and squeeze in a few more quick questions. So, Steve, will PPDS labelling a requirement include the quid?
Quid is required for meat products only. Is the short answer.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to sort of open this question to anyone in the panel, and I'd welcome a few comments just to sort of close the question and answer session. Will the labelling requirements not just encourage less conversations and verbal communication between the consumer and the food business? I'd start off with Tim. Tim, would you like to give me a view on that?
Well, when you go to buy something from a supermarket, let's go with a packaged sandwich, which is covered by legislation as it stands at the moment, you're not having a conversation with the person that might have made that sandwich and the actual retailer. This law means that other sandwiches and other products covered by this law, you can trust the labelling. That's what this is actually been put in place to do. So therefore, where you aren't sure, you are still going to ask where you have a food allergy. So what this does, I think, is, in answer to the question, does it reduce the number of conversations? It does where you can rely on the labelling, but it doesn't where you can't. So therefore, it still means having a conversation, but it means an increase in the number of trusted, safe products, thanks to there being accurate labelling.
Thank you. I'd welcome a view from Callum.
I wouldn't say necessarily. I think what it does is increase the amount of information that's available to consumers. I think as well, in some projects that FSS have carried out, we've noticed that in some of the younger age groups, they are reluctant to discuss their food allergies for various reasons. And what this will potentially do is make selecting a product or make going out and getting food safer for them. There's no, although the products will have labelling on them, there's nothing to prevent a consumer having a conversation with the member of staff at the time. Yeah. Thank
you. Arvind.
Yeah, I think continuing from Callum's point, I think the introduction of the legislation, hopefully, it's created another shift in terms of the provision of allergen information, and that in itself should create more of a conversation. So hopefully, as we approach 1st of October, and particularly when we've got the consumer-focused messaging, there'll be more conversations being had about allergies and food intolerances and the importance of this legislative shift. So I think that in itself is really, really important. And I think our Speak Up for Allergies campaign that we targeted to young people earlier this year promoted the message that young people should still talk to businesses and particularly in the current COVID context, and speak about their allergy and have that conversation. So I think alongside with legislation, we hope to see a sort of wider cultural shift, and some of that will come about because of legislation, but hopefully there'll be other accompanying things that we can do to create that shift too. But I think our message would still be that anyone who has a food allergy or intolerance, if in doubt, still have that conversation with the business, and the business as well should be willing to have that conversation too.
Thank you. Steve, anything to add to the comments from the remainder of the panel?
I agree with all the comments that have been made, and that it should make things safer. There will be still an element of double checking, I think, from those who may suffer from hypersensitivities or intolerances. So I still think there will be verbal communication between the consumer and food businesses.
Yeah, it's important. I think you can't get away from the communication. And as said, if in doubt, always ask, always make it known. It's very, very important that the fundamentals actually do not get eradicated through some of these changes. Very, very important. So we've come to the end of our Q&A session. First of all, I want to thank all those who've posted questions and have raised questions. We've tried to deal with as many as possible. Some were a bit more detailed in the nature of what they were raising. I hope that you found the answers helpful. As I said, the Q&A on Smarter Comms will be updated. I also want to say a big thank you to Tim and Callum for taking time to join us. It's an important webinar. It's very, very, very significant in terms of the lead up to the regulatory changes. So my thanks to you, and thanks to all the panelists and to the presenters for all the helpful information and useful information. So we're coming into the last 10 odd minutes of the session. So could I have the next slide, please? So resources and guidance. So I just wanted to recap on the resources and guidance that you've heard about all the way through the sessions. But before I do that, there is a polling question. What else would you like to see from the FSA to help local authorities and food businesses with the implementation of PPDS? So if you'd like to put your poll questions and answers on that question, then please could you. I'm just going to cover off the sort of resources and guidance that we've got. So please, could you now go to the next slide? Right, so you've heard the 1 year to go campaign. The resources that we've got available for Prepacked direct sales. So as indicated, we've got the FSA website. It provides an overview of the PPDS changes. You've got the tool checker that helps you assess whether you're selling PPDS or not, and very, very important for business to see whether they are affected by these changes. So I would really encourage people to go onto the website. We've got the new sector content guides, which Steve kindly mentioned. Again, it's for different sectors, addressing the sorts of concerns that have arisen and through the questions that we've had. So please, again, if you're from a specific sector, such as a baker, etc., please go and have a look at the information and the content that appears on our websites. We've also published the outlining labelling information that's relevant for Prepacked direct sales changes. And again, go and have a look. The technical guidance, the allergen information and labelling technical guidance was issued last year. It was updated. Again, please go and have a refresher of that. Might have forgotten, it was published last year. And again, it's very, very important that you're familiar with the technical guidance that we've put out. In terms of the practical aspects which you can suggest to food businesses or yourself, we've got the free e-learning training, which has a new content on Prepacked direct sales. Please go in, free to have an account, but to run through all the e-learning. It's very, very important. We've got in excess of 90,000 people who've signed up accounts, and I would encourage those who haven't to go through, aimed at local authorities and businesses. And Smarter Comms, I've mentioned Smarter Comms on and off. We've got specific guidance pertinent to Prepacked direct sales, which appears there. And the lead up to October, keep your eyes and ears open. That is continuously going to be updated on Smarter Comms. Next guide, please. Next slide. So what's the continuum of support that you are going to be getting? We've got the dedicated email in a mailbox. So it's ppds@food.gov.uk. You can send your queries through. People already have. We've had so many questions and queries over the last few months. You can easily pop a question if you're in doubt, and we'll see what we can do as quickly as we can. I just wanted to remind local authority colleagues on a couple of other things. The approach to escalating still continues. Those who are from local authorities, you'll know that the approach of escalation has been endorsed by the Food Hygiene Focus Group and also the Food Standards and Information Focus Group. So you liaise within your authority, you liaise regionally or county-wide, and then you raise up to the focus groups who will raise questions of the FSA. So again, that standard continues to apply. There's no change on that. It's just a reminder to you guys on that. The recording, we are been recording this session. It's going to be available as an additional source of information. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're hoping to make this available the week commencing the 9th of August. It will be transcribed. Ask your colleagues to have a look and to tap into to the useful information you've got in terms of some of the detail that's been provided. Please encourage and please share. What would be really, really helpful and important is to actually hear from you with feedback. What did you think of today's session? Where do you think we can help you? What sort of things you found useful? What sort of things you didn't find useful? And, you know, the poll question that I've asked, it's very, very important to sort of see what additional stuff we can do to help you in the lead up to October. Things won't end on the 1st of October. It's a continuum, and it's very, very important that people are geared up and supported. And for me, it's exceptionally important for food standards to be providing the level of support that's required in this space. I asked a poll question right at the beginning. Where are you joining us from? Pleased to say we've got people from London, from Ireland, from authorities, from county councils. So I'm really, really, really happy and pleased that we've got so many important areas represented, but also colleagues who've joined this webinar from all over to actually hopefully find this a very, very important, helpful source of information for pre-packed direct sales, which come into force on the 1st of October. So I think my last slide is going to top this all off, and that is thank you for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for your questions. Thank you to the panelists, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Any questions, again, please come through to the PPDS mailbox. We're here to help. Thank you.